Okay, welcome to another episode of Inhalants Engineering. So 2 years ago, I built a prototype synthesizer based around a Gameboy. We called it the Lameboy as a reference to a 2005 Newgrounds porn game called Frank's Adventure. I made a cover of a pup song on that they never listened to despite how much we harassed them. And we also put it in a bunch of our own material. We've been using that piece of shit ever since at shows, and as YouTube user Skeleton Meat pointed out, it's hardly a synthesizer that I came up with. It's basically just a Game Boy running LSDJ. It's got a Chaos pad, and then it has a mixer. It's also got like a keyboard kind of thing, but that just programs notes from LSDJ. And I never really used that keyboard feature because it sucks, and overall the project was built with no planning, and it was built with no skills. So you get a certain kind of quality out of that style of manufacturing. Essentially, it was a prototype to see what we'd actually need. And that prototype had a lot of problems. First of all, it was clunky. It's ugly. It needed to be assembled in pieces at every show. And most of the time we had a longer setup time than our set. You know, a lot of small shows, we play like 20 minutes. So it also creates a lot of ground loop issues and pretty embarrassing technical issues. It's hard to carry. While I'm playing, I have to actually like stop playing bass or stop singing to go and trigger the backing tracks. Hold on. And the list goes on. So I'm starting work on version 2. This is going to be really complicated. The goal is to have a full-fledged, professional-looking and feeling instrument that's exclusive to our music. So ideally, I want to be the only one who knows how to play this thing. You can think about Enter Shikari has a similar idea, but mine is going to be way cooler. A rough list of design goals goes like this. First of all, it's going to be fully 3D modeled in Fusion 360. I've never done any 3D modeling before. I want it all cut with a CNC and water jet or laser cutter. It's got to look like a real product, but it still needs to look homemade enough that it's impressive. If it looks too good, people aren't going to notice, and then I won't get the attention that I would like. You know, we are a band, and we do it for the attention. It's got to still run on a Game Boy as the main source of sound. That's obviously a big part of our gimmick. So it needs to reduce our setup time. Ideally, I want it to be shorter to set up than before we even started using the synth. It's got to be able to take a serious beating because everything gets smashed at our shows. The sequencer needs to be able to be triggered by my feet, and it must incorporate a more serious but still restrictive sampler that I can use to play with one hand when I want to put down the bass, and I'll talk about that more. And then most important to me, honestly, it needs to be beautiful. The one right now is super ugly. I need to have something that I like to look at, and given that I'm going to try and make something really nice, it has to have a road case, and I'm going to make that custom. And then lastly, and most importantly, is it needs to be fun to play. Because right now, the one that I have is a fucking nightmare to use. I'm always worried that there's going to be issues. I'm always worried that it's going to break down when we're playing. I'm worried that people are going to complain because we take so long to set up. And, you know, with our newer material, there's no way to play these songs unplugged. Like, the synth has such a forward roll in them that we just can't play those songs. So if it breaks down, we're kind of fucked and we're just playing old material, and our old material kind of sucks. So let's dive into my design, shall we? I made it in Fusion 360, like I was saying. And when I started doing the modeling, that was the first time I'd ever used Fusion. So anybody that's actually done any CAD is going to point out a bunch of holes in what I'm doing, which is obviously the point. It seems to be the best model for me to learn how to do like new things. I commit to the idea of what I want to do first, and then I learn the associated skills during. I just commit to not using any workarounds, or as few as I can manage, so that when I come up to an issue, I force myself to go learn about the thing that I'm trying to do. So a particular task or a particular method of doing something, I just decide to do that. It took about 6 full days of work to get to this point, and then quite a bit more after that went unaccounted for, probably another couple of days there. So it basically goes like this. The main control surface is the NES arcade stick. The NES Advantage. This was an arcade stick that was made for the NES originally, and it works like an NES controller, but it's got a few other functions like a turbo and stuff. Obviously, you can see in the 3D model, I didn't really do a good job of it, and that's because the top of this is not relevant to the rest of the design. So the parts that are going to be built are some of these other items, but I'm not building one of those from scratch. Anyway, that's the main control interface for the device. It's going to control the Game Boy, which is going to be mounted here. I just realized now as I'm looking at this that I did not model the Game Boy. So this plate here is actually going to have a Game Boy mounted, and I can show you kind of an idea of what that's going to look like. This here is a Raspberry Pi based sampler called Sampler Box. These are keys from a little Korg micro key MIDI controller. And then the idea with the sampler box is like I have to learn how to run displays, I have to learn Raspberry Pi, and it's really straightforward. You load samples on it and it plays those. And so 2 octaves is pretty limited, so I have to learn to work within that, and you know, I'm probably gonna have to learn to cycle through octaves as I'm playing to move up if I cross the second C. But that's the idea. Is I find that when I have limitations imposed, I have more freedom to be creative, and actually the more options I have, the within reason, the less opportunity I have to be creative. So that's why I'm not using just a laptop. Everybody asks, why don't you just use a laptop and a MIDI controller? And that's why. So fuck your laptop. All of the synth sounds, everything besides this is all coming from the Game Boy, and that's just done through LSDJ. I explained that a little bit more in my last video. You can see that up here. This here is a Chaos Pad. If you don't know what that is, it's a multi-effects processor that uses a trackpad, like on a laptop, and the XY values on the trackpad actually determine the parameters of effects. So like the decay and the depth of reverb, for example, or the speed of an oscillator, whatever, it's all controlled here. And that's nice because it has a really human touch. And again, the same thing. I don't want to have something that feels like a computer. I want something that feels like an instrument. And that's it for the control surface, so this whole bottom portion. And the components across the top goes like this. This is just a logo. It's going to be back illuminated with an EL panel, and this is also extra space in case I want to include more modules. These are all just made on water jet cut steel. This is going to be the Game Boy mounted to the plate. And then this here is a patch bay, which is to route all the different components to the proper signal path. So I'm going to have wires coming out of here, plugging into each. It's basically the input and output of each device, and they're all on one plate, so I can route them as I please without having to plug into the actual back of these devices here. On this side, this is a mixer. It's actually just going to be a Behringer 502, like the Xenix 502, that cheap 2-channel mixer. That's going to handle all the volume and everything and the outputs for the device. It's actually going to run into here and a DI box and other stuff like that. And then here is just a noise gate because the Game Boy is pretty noisy. Down here is where my bass amp is going to go. So my amp is a little GK solid state D-class amp, which means it's really small, but it's still 500 watts, and there's an 800 watt one that will fit in case I ever decide to upgrade. My amp is actually going to be in the synth here, so I can control everything from the front of the stage. And the idea with this whole project is to take as much of my stage gear as I can and incorporate it into this one piece so that I plug this in to power. It powers everything, including my amp. And then I plug my amp, the speaker cable, into my speaker cab at the back of the stage. And this will actually power my pedals. And I haven't designed that yet, but there's going to be a complicated pedal board setup as well. That should really minimize our setup time. And then lastly, this all needs to be incorporated into a flight case that's custom built for it. So here's a rough idea of what that would look like. But it's just a box that's going to fit it in with foam, custom cut foam, so that this is all protected, because right now it's pretty exposed when we get in the van, and nobody really cares about each other's stuff in the band. So shit gets broken, and I'm pretty proud of it. I think it actually turned out really well. So that's the idea. And going forward, I'm going to be documenting the whole design and build process of each component and the project as a whole. To make things more complicated, this thing could probably take 6 to 12 months for all I know, and we need to be able to play shows in that time. So I'm going to be half building and tearing down parts of this as we have shows. And then down the road, I kind of want to take a break from playing. It's going to be an ordeal, but I think by the end, it's going to be something pretty impressive. And then maybe we won't be the best band you've never heard of, but we could at least be the worst band that you have heard of. And we don't really do a good job of showing the work that we put into anybody. Like, we barely have any following, but we put in a ton of work on this, on not just, building, but we work on a lot of different projects. And our songs also take a shit ton of work. It's just why the release schedule is so low, and we're just busy people. So I'm trying to do this to actually share what we do, because I think the process is pretty interesting. That's kind of what I like to watch as well. So anyway, thanks for watching. I don't know what the upload schedule is going to be, but I will finish this project. Half of this is for me to have something to be able to look back on. I like taking on ambitious things and I forget what the progress was. And half is to be able to share what we do, like I was saying. And we barely have any following, like I said. So every comment or share is pretty useful. And I'm going to respond to everything that warrants a response, because really the only reason I do this is to get the feedback and attention. All right, thanks. See you on the next one. I'm not going to ask for subscribers, because fuck the people that do that. So you guys know what to do if you want to do anything.